A child who felt no pain ascended the throne of Jerusalem. A decade later, his body had withered into a mask of blindness, paralysis, and decay. For generations, the cause of his death seemed obvious. Yet recent medical analysis has exposed a secret buried beneath 8 centuries of assumption, a secret that suggests Baldwin IV wasn't struck down by a single disease, but by a convergence of forces no medieval healer could have recognized. What deadly combination struck down the boy king, and how did it go unnoticed for centuries? The Silent Wound. Jerusalem, 1161. A sharp fingernail slashes across young Baldwin's forearm during a courtyard game. Blood flows instantly. The other boys freeze, waiting for Baldwin to cry out. He doesn't. No wince, no flinch, nothing. His tutor, William of Tyre, watches with mounting dread, because what he's witnessing isn't bravery. It's the absence of something every child should possess, the ability to feel pain. William tests Baldwin privately afterward, pinching his arm, pressing sharp objects against his skin. Baldwin stares back in calm confusion. William records the moment with precision. The boy felt nothing when struck or pinched. Within weeks, numbness spreads through Baldwin's right hand, then his left. Servants whisper the story through palace corridors. The boy who feels nothing, they murmur, as though the words carry contagion. Baldwin was born into chaos. His father, King Amalric I, ruled Jerusalem during the Crusades when the city stood between 3 religions and constant war. The heir was expected to embody both divine promise and warrior strength. William of Tyre shaped Baldwin's education, prayer before letters, command before understanding, and weapons training alongside boys twice his age. Nothing allowed space for weakness. Yet the numbness wasn't improving. Medieval physicians applied oils and fomentations. They consulted Abu Sulaiman Dawood, an Arab Christian scholar trained in Egypt. Nothing restored the feeling. The treatments failed because physicians were fighting something they'd never encountered, a disease attacking from 2 directions at once. In 12th century Jerusalem, progressive numbness carried only one diagnosis: leprosy. The disease that turned men into outcasts, forced them to warn others with clanging bells. The condition medieval society believed marked divine judgment itself. But Baldwin's numbness followed patterns that didn't match what physicians expected. It moved too quickly in some areas, too slowly in others. The contradictions were subtle, easy to miss in an era when medical understanding remained primitive. Palace doctors whispered their confusion but had no alternative diagnosis. The symptoms accelerated. By age 10, both hands showed advanced numbness. By 12, his feet were affected. The progression was faster than typical leprosy, more erratic, more devastating. Physicians documented these inconsistencies in notes that would gather dust for centuries, unaware they were observing something unprecedented. The whispers behind closed doors finally spoke the name everyone feared, and 13-year-old Baldwin was about to inherit not just a kingdom, but a death sentence that would unfold in ways no one could predict. Crown and catastrophe. In July 1174, priests pressed sacred oil onto 13-year-old Baldwin's brow in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. His father, King Amalric I, had died 4 days earlier. Jerusalem couldn't afford a succession crisis. The boy accepted the crown, knowing his body was betraying him. The political situation was deteriorating. Saladin had unified Egypt and Syria, forging an army driven by religious zeal. Within Jerusalem's walls, rival nobles maneuvered for power, calculating how long a diseased child king might last. Everyone knew Baldwin's health was failing. Numbness had spread to hands and feet, but few understood how quickly deterioration would accelerate. Baldwin understood. He threw himself into military training with intensity that alarmed tutors. He insisted on the same drills expected of grown knights, even as his hands struggled to grip a sword. His skin took on a luminous pallor that made him appear spiritual, yet he refused suggestions to rest. Rumors spread faster than official proclamations. The king is cursed. The king is unclean. In medieval imagination, leprosy wasn't merely medical, it was visible proof of divine displeasure, spiritual corruption made manifest in rotting flesh. As symptoms became impossible to conceal, Baldwin's private mystery transformed into a public spectacle. Every appearance at Mass, every audience with dignitaries became an opportunity for hushed speculation about what his condition meant for the kingdom's fate. The irony cut deep. Baldwin prayed daily, devoted to God, yet bore the very mark his people believed proved divine curse. Baldwin's disease progressed faster than any leprosy case they'd documented. Some symptoms matched their understanding, others defied it completely. The pattern of nerve death, the rate of tissue degradation, and the preservation of mental faculties, none of which followed established patterns. They recorded their bewilderment in medical notes, but had no framework to interpret what they were observing. Baldwin refused to hide. He appeared in council, rode through Jerusalem's streets, and met with military commanders, while disease continued its relentless advance. His determination was absolute. Weakness invited conquest, and he would not give enemies any reason to believe Jerusalem's throne had weakened. But if courtiers thought his condition would confine him to palace chambers, they drastically underestimated the young king, because in 1177 he would make a decision that even his closest advisors called suicide. The impossible victory. 16-year-old Baldwin could barely grip a sword. His fingers had stiffened into partial claws, his feet dragged when he walked, and sensation had drained from entire sections of his body. When news arrived that Saladin was marching north with 26,000 men, Baldwin made a decision his advisors called suicidal. He would meet Saladin in open battle. Jerusalem could muster maybe 500 knights and a few thousand infantry, hopelessly outnumbered. Advisors begged Baldwin to remain behind fortified walls. He refused. If Jerusalem fell while he cowered behind stone, the kingdom's morale would shatter. On the morning of November 25th at Montgisard, attendants lifted Baldwin onto his horse. They secured leather straps around his weakening legs to keep him upright, because his lower limbs were losing functional strength. His hands required wrapping to maintain a minimal grip on reins. His vision was beginning to cloud, though he wasn't yet blind. Baldwin spotted Saladin's tactical error. The Muslim army had spread thin during their northward march. Supply lines stretched. He ordered an immediate charge at their weakest point, a calculated gamble that the shock of heavy cavalry hitting their exposed center would create panic before superior numbers could respond. What happened next defied military logic. Baldwin led a cavalry charge directly into Saladin's vanguard. Against every probability, the Crusader force shattered the Muslim lines. Saladin's army, vastly superior in numbers, broke into panicked retreat. The Sultan barely escaped, abandoning supplies and thousands of casualties. Victory thundered across Christendom. A teenage king with leprosy had defeated the age's most formidable Muslim commander. Chroniclers wrote of it as near miraculous, divine intervention, proving God still favored Jerusalem. But the celebration was brief. Behind palace doors, Baldwin's condition accelerated dramatically. His fingers blackened at the tips as tissue died. Ulcers split open along his limbs, weeping fluid requiring constant bandaging. His voice thinned to a rasp only close attendants could decipher. Baldwin's condition was ravaging him in mere years. Nerves died in patterns that didn't match their understanding. Some body parts deteriorated rapidly, while others remained inexplicably functional. Muslim chroniclers also noted something unusual. Saladin's own writers documented respect for Baldwin, with some accounts noting the Sultan acknowledged the Frankish king fought with courage transcending normal human capacity. The contradiction puzzled observers. How could someone so physically compromised maintain such command presence? What medieval doctors couldn't comprehend, 21st century researchers would eventually decode, but first, Baldwin had to endure 5 more years of transformations that would make him almost unrecognizable, ruling a kingdom from what appeared to be a corpse. If this story is gripping you, hit that like button. We're just getting to the truly shocking part. The living ghost. By age 20, Baldwin's face had changed so dramatically that courtiers struggled to maintain composure in his presence. His cheeks hollowed into sharp planes. Skin beneath his eyes darkened into bruised shadows. The structure of his nose warped as leprosy eroded cartilage. Some accounts suggest Baldwin wore linen veils during certain appearances, though this remains debated among historians. What's certain is that citizens who saw him were struck by reverence mixed with sorrow. When he appeared publicly, crowds gathered not to celebrate, but to witness. Everyone knew they were watching a man hold power through sheer will while his body disintegrated. Medieval leprosy protocols demanded isolation. The afflicted were exiled beyond city walls, forced to wear identifying clothing and ring bells. But Baldwin was king. He couldn't vanish into a leper colony. The entire kingdom became his domain, and his confinement simultaneously. Physicians tried everything medieval medicine offered. Nothing worked. Yet Baldwin's mind remained razor-sharp. He governed with clarity that baffled envoys, making strategic decisions with precision that seemed impossible given his physical state. By 1183, 22-year-old Baldwin was blind. His legs hung uselessly beneath royal robes. He couldn't stand without support. Attendants carried him on a padded litter, propping him with cushions to steady constant tremors. Eyewitnesses described a surreal scene. Baldwin lay pale and motionless on his litter, covered in linen, carried behind banners with golden crosses. His face showed no expression. His hands, curled and rigid, rested on his chest. Generals wept openly. Ordinary soldiers followed in stunned silence, moving as though in a religious procession. French chroniclers struggled to capture what they witnessed. Their accounts read like attempts to describe something defying categorization. A monarch so ravaged that he appeared already dead, yet he commanded armies with an authority that seemed divinely sustained. But physicians understood he was dying. The blindness was permanent, paralysis nearly complete, and new infections appeared weekly. His voice had faded to barely a whisper. Within the palace, scribes drafted Baldwin's epitaph, and when death came, it would leave behind a medical mystery that would haunt historians for 8 centuries. The kingdom dies with him. In March 1185, slow mourning bells sounded across Jerusalem. Baldwin IV was dead at 23. His final days unfolded in chambers thick with incense, meant to mask infection's sharp odor. Yet even dying, Baldwin's mind remained clear. He summoned the high court one final time. Unable to see the nobles before him, barely able to form words, he dictated succession with precise intent. His nephew, 8-year-old Baldwin V, would inherit the throne. Scribes raced to record the fragile voice, while the court watched in silence. Before the gathering dispersed, Baldwin made one final plea that would echo through history. "Let my disease die with me." It wasn't self-pity, but a desperate prayer that no future ruler would endure what had consumed him. His body was placed in a limestone sarcophagus beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Jerusalem mourned not just a monarch, but the end of an era defined by extraordinary resilience. The tragedy deepened quickly. Baldwin V died barely a year after his coronation, not yet 9 years old. The succession crisis that followed ripped the kingdom apart as noble factions fought for control. Just 2 years later, in October 1187, Saladin recaptured Jerusalem. The Crusader kingdom Baldwin IV had fought to preserve collapsed almost the moment he was gone. William of Tyre, who had watched the boy's first symptoms with dread, wrote years later with undisguised sorrow, "Never have I seen such courage attached to such suffering, nor such authority wielded from a body so betrayed." Over the following centuries, Jerusalem changed hands repeatedly. Baldwin's tomb location became uncertain as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre underwent renovations, destructions, and reconstructions. The true nature of his illness faded into legend, obscured by medieval superstition and fragmentary chronicles. For 800 years, historians debated what had really killed Baldwin IV. Was it pure leprosy? Some form of aggressive endemic syphilis? A combination of diseases? The medical records were too primitive, the symptoms too inconsistent, the remains too scattered to provide definitive answers. For 8 centuries, historians called it leprosy, but the symptoms never quite fit. None could explain the specific contradictions in Baldwin's symptoms, the rapid progression, the pattern of nerve death, the preserved cognitive function, the unpredictable remissions. The answer required medical knowledge that wouldn't exist for 700 years, and a disease medieval doctors had never heard of. Share this with a history lover who needs to hear this story. We're about to reveal something extraordinary. The medical detective work. Medical historians began applying modern diagnostic frameworks to detailed chronicles left by William of Tyre and other contemporary observers. What they found challenged everything scholars thought they understood. The breakthrough came when researchers began systematically analyzing Baldwin's documented symptoms using 21st century knowledge of neurology, genetics, and infectious disease. They compiled every recorded observation: childhood numbness, pattern of sensation loss, rate of physical decline, preserved mental acuity, unpredictable disease progression. When they cross-referenced these symptoms against modern medical databases, something extraordinary emerged. The symptom profile didn't match pure leprosy. It matched something far more complex. Dr. Piers Mitchell, a paleopathology specialist at Cambridge University, was among the researchers proposing a radical reinterpretation. In scholarly analyses examining medieval medical texts, the analysis suggested Baldwin's symptoms indicated not just Mycobacterium leprae infection, but a dual pathology: leprosy combined with underlying hereditary neuropathy, specifically Charcot-Marie tooth disease. Charcot-Marie tooth disease is a genetic disorder affecting peripheral nerves, progressively destroying the body's ability to transmit signals to muscles and sense touch, pain, and temperature. It's inherited, slow-developing, and creates vulnerability to secondary infections. Critically, it produces many symptoms chroniclers attributed to Baldwin: progressive numbness, muscle wasting, difficulty walking, and loss of motor control. Here's where it gets remarkable. Charcot-Marie tooth disease wouldn't be formally identified until 1886, more than 700 years after Baldwin's death. Medieval physicians had no framework to recognize hereditary neuropathy. When they saw progressive nerve damage, they could only attribute it to leprosy because that was the only diagnosis available. But the hypothesis of combined CMT and leprosy explains everything that confused medieval doctors. It explains why Baldwin's disease progressed faster than typical leprosy. Genetic neuropathy was already degrading his nervous system, creating pathways for leprosy bacteria to spread with unusual efficiency. It explains unpredictable symptom patterns. CMT affects nerves unevenly, and leprosy bacteria exploit the most vulnerable areas first. It explains Baldwin's preserved cognitive function. Neither CMT nor leprosy affects the brain directly, only peripheral nerves. And it explains his extraordinary pain tolerance. CMT combined with leprosy would have destroyed most sensory nerves early, making him literally unable to feel the deterioration. The dual diagnosis also explains Baldwin's longevity. Pure lepromatous leprosy of the severity described typically progresses to death more quickly. But CMT, being genetic rather than infectious, follows its own timeline. The combination created a unique pathology that allowed Baldwin to function far longer than pure leprosy would have permitted, even as his body visibly deteriorated. Medical historians emphasize that this remains a hypothesis based on symptom analysis rather than DNA evidence, but it's the best explanation currently available, supported by a detailed comparison of Baldwin's documented symptoms with modern clinical presentations of both conditions. The pieces were finally falling into place, but understanding what Baldwin actually faced reveals something even more staggering about what he accomplished during his 11-year reign. Fighting two wars simultaneously. To understand what Baldwin endured, you have to imagine two diseases working together like perfectly aligned enemies, each one amplifying the other's destruction. Charcot-Marie tooth disease had been quietly weakening his nerves since birth. The signals from his brain were traveling through wires that were already fraying, even if the damage wasn't obvious yet. Then the second enemy arrived. Somewhere in early childhood, Baldwin likely came into contact with someone carrying leprosy without knowing it. For most people, the bacteria spread slowly, but Baldwin wasn't most people. His nerves were already vulnerable, already losing their protective insulation. So when the leprosy bacteria entered his body, they found a nervous system with its defenses down. That's when the real disaster began. The bacteria attacked the same nerves that CMT had weakened. The weakened nerves made it easier for leprosy to spread, and the spread of leprosy accelerated the nerve damage caused by CMT. It became a biological loop, each condition feeding the other, driving Baldwin's decline faster than anyone around him could explain. It also explains the timeline perfectly. The numbness the physicians noted in his childhood, they were the early signs of CMT, likely intensified by the earliest stages of leprosy. The sharp deterioration in his teens? That was leprosy exploiting a genetic weakness it could not have created on its own. The uneven progression of symptoms? A combination of degenerating nerve groups and bacteria colonizing whichever pathways failed first. And through all of this, one thing stayed untouched: his mind. Even as his vision dimmed and his body collapsed, Baldwin's memory, judgment, and strategic thinking remained razor-sharp. Medieval chroniclers struggled to make sense of it. How could a man so broken still outthink generals, diplomats, and rival kings? They called it divine intervention or dark sorcery. But the real answer is far more human and far more tragic. The diseases destroyed the wiring, not the processor. However, as we mentioned earlier, there's another consequence. Baldwin barely felt pain. Both conditions sever sensory nerves, so while his body was deteriorating, he experienced little of the agony that should have come with it. That's why he could sit through hours of council meetings with pressure sores tearing into his skin. That's how he could be strapped to a horse and ride into battle without collapsing from pain. And this brings us to one of the most astonishing moments in medieval history, the Battle of Montgisard. Baldwin wasn't simply a sick king leading troops. He was a young man with advanced hereditary neuropathy and an aggressive bacterial infection, riding into battle without the ability to fully feel his hands, his legs, or the horse beneath him. Every command from his brain had to travel through nerves that were failing. Every sensation returning to him was distorted or missing, yet he didn't fall, he didn't break, he won. Facing an army far larger than his own, Baldwin led a charge that should have been physically impossible. Modern medicine explains the miracle. He wasn't protected by heaven. He was fighting with a mind sharpened by desperation and a body too numb to register the suffering he pushed through. Baldwin IV wasn't cursed. He wasn't blessed. He was a young king born with a rare genetic weakness that a medieval disease exploited with ruthless precision, and he still managed to hold Jerusalem together for 11 years longer than history ever expected. The question that changes everything. So here's what we're left with. Baldwin IV ruled 11 years with what medical historians now believe was a dual diagnosis: hereditary Charcot-Marie tooth disease plus leprosy, two conditions attacking his nervous system simultaneously. Medieval medicine couldn't identify either, let alone understand how they interacted. The CMT plus leprosy hypothesis, while not definitively proven without DNA evidence, represents the most comprehensive explanation currently available for the constellation of symptoms medieval chroniclers documented. It explains the rapid progression that confused physicians, the pattern of nerve damage that didn't match pure leprosy, the preservation of cognitive abilities, and the specific physical manifestations that made Baldwin's condition uniquely devastating. Every decision he made was measured against the limits of a failing body. Every battle he commanded was a victory over his own biological constraints. Every political maneuver was conducted while his nervous system systematically shut down. His reign was an 11-year demonstration that human will, intelligence, and determination can overcome catastrophic biological disadvantage, at least temporarily. Knowing what medical historians now suspect about his condition, that he was simultaneously fighting hereditary nerve degeneration and bacterial infection working in destructive synergy, reframes every achievement. The Battle of Montgisard wasn't just a military victory, it was a biological impossibility. His governance wasn't just effective leadership, it was cognition triumphing over a body in systematic rebellion. Baldwin IV's story isn't diminished by understanding the probable nature of his illness. It's elevated beyond anything medieval chroniclers imagined. They saw divine intervention, or cursed suffering. Modern analysis reveals something potentially more remarkable: a human being functioning at the absolute edge of what biology permits, compensating for catastrophic neural damage through sheer adaptive capacity. The diagnosis proposed by medical historians doesn't reduce his legacy to a medical curiosity. It reveals that the courage medieval writers celebrated was even more extraordinary than they understood. Baldwin wasn't fighting despite illness. He was fighting through a dual pathology that should have made everything he accomplished completely impossible. Was Baldwin IV's greatest battle fought on the fields against Saladin, or within his own body against two diseases working together to destroy him? Knowing what medical historians now propose, that he was simultaneously fighting hereditary nerve degeneration and bacterial infection, does that make him a better king, or does it just make what he did more impossible? Drop your answer in the comments section, and if you've made it this far, hit that subscribe button, because history is full of mysteries modern science is only beginning to solve, and we're bringing you every one of them. Thanks for watching, see you in the next one.